Welcome back. We're in the Nefesh HaHaim, Sha'ar Gimel. We're beginning a new chapter, Perek Yud Gimel. And I was preparing today, and Perek Yud Gimel of Sha'ar Gimel actually is like the Iker. It's really some really central and actually very famous ideas of the Nefesh HaHaim are in this chapter. So I'm really excited to share this with you this evening. We've been talking throughout the Sha'ar about two different emanations, two different ways of understanding reality. The Shem Havaya Baruch Hu, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Ein Od Milvado, Kipshuto Mamish. From God's perspective, the world is the same nothingness that it was before He created and after He created it. But from our perspective, Bereshis Bara Elokim Es Hashemayim Es Haaretz, He created the earth and here we are. And so God is the master of all forces, but all forces exist. So the world is a complexity. So here we go. What he's going to do here is differentiate between the madrega of the Avos HaKadoshim, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, versus the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. So that is that's what this shtickle Torah is about. Okay, let me just see that I'm recording. Yeah, great. Okay. So Zaya Inyan Avodas Avos Kol Yemem Ki Hema Ben Noira Ois Tzid Kasam V'Taharas Kedushas Libam Hayu Midabkim Machshavtam L'Ritzoino Yizbarach Kol Yemeyem B'li Hefsik Rega. So he gives a lot of credit to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They were on an incredibly high madrega of devotion, complete devotion, total devotion throughout their lives without a minute of ever peeling away from that. Their heart was totally pure. Their mind was totally pure. Their ratzon is just to do his ratzon, beli hafsik rega. Ubatlu birtsoinam kol hakoichoi sheba oilam v'le'efes v'to nechshavu etzlam. Good morning, good evening, Jay Pubko. Glad you could join us.
Good evening.
We're just beginning this chapter, Yud Gimel, and he's going to differentiate between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Avos HaKadoshim. So he's starting with the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and he's saying how great they were. They were totally dveikim b'Hashem every moment. They were mevatel their ratzon, and through their bittul ratzon of their persona, that allowed them to rise above forces of nature. And so miracles happen. For example, Abraham is thrown into a fiery furnace, and the fire doesn't burn him. And that just this morning we talked about when fire burns a person, that's not a punishment. That's a physical reality. Fire burns. So how could the fire not burn Abraham? That's like a suspension of the laws of nature. And that's like where the Avos live. They batlu bertsoinim kol koichei shebe'olam v'le'efes v'to nechshavu atzlam. Everything by them is null and void in comparison to the will of God. V'lechein zachu gam lenisim nifloim. And this is a really key word, b'shidud hamarachot v'tzive'ehem kanal. This word shadud, today we have shodidim and shodidei yam are pirates. So this is like to plunder or to take. And where the Nefesh HaHaim is going with this, he's going to talk about the shame shakai, shin daled yud, and Chazal associate that shame with this word for piracy of Hashem is shoded marachot shamayim va'aretz, meaning abrogation of the laws of nature on behalf of his beloved righteous people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's not that it's natural for the world to cooperate with the righteous. That may be later after Matan Torah, the world will change and be subjugated to like the laws of the Torah. But right now at this early stage of human history, really the laws of nature are supreme. God created the world and the fire burns and everything is supposed to proceed business as usual. And so for Abraham not to get burnt in the fiery furnace, that is going to have to be an abrogation of the laws of nature. That's called shidud hamarachot v'tziv'eim kanal. V'lechein nityached shmo yitbarach aleihem likarei Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak. So because of their unity of heart, their total devotion to God, So God makes himself known as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. There's reciprocity here. Amru Yisbarach ba'atzmo Elokei avotechem. God describes himself in Moses' time, I am the God of your forefathers. V'lezeh amru razal. Chazal use a beautiful expression here, ha'ovois hein hamerkava. So we've talked a little bit about the Merkava, the Ma'aseh Merkava, the vision of Yechezkel, the vision of Yeshayahu, the heavenly workings of how Hashem interacts with his creation. And Chazal here say that these men, these great men, our patriarchs, they themselves were representative of God's interaction with the world. And you actually see that in the text of the Torah, that the Hittites of Ephron, when Abraham wants to buy that burial plot, Maras Machpelah for Sarah, they say to Abraham, Ata Nasi Elokim betochenu. You are a prince of God amongst us. We see you as a man of God. You're a holy man. So we don't want to mess with you. We want to support you. And if you want to buy something, we want to sell it to you. We want to aid and facilitate whatever you want to do, because you're a prince of God. So that's the idea of ha'avois hein markava. They are representative of the Shechina. The Shechina is, as it were, riding on these great men through their total devotion to Hashem's will at every moment of their lives. So far, that is the great Madrega of the patriarchs, but we're now going to go up the next step, which is the Madrega Moshe Rabbeinu. However, Omnam Madregas Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom Haita od yoter gavoa, even higher. K'moshe he'ida ha'Torah. The Torah says, "V'lo kam navi b'Yisrael k'Moshe." Ve'etzem chiluk madrigasoi, b'madrigasam, birhu yizbarach ba'atzmo. Hashem himself clarified it. Ve'amar ani Hashem, ani havaya. This is the beginning of Parshas Va'era, and Hashem delineates between the prophecy of the patriarchs and the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And he says, Va'era el Avraham bekel shakai, ushmi havaya lo nodati lahem. Okay, so Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, the way that God appears in the Aspaklaria Ha'meira, the really clear lens that he appears to Moshe Rabbeinu, is something that the Avos never experienced. They were getting an Aspaklaria She'ena Me'ira, less clear lens. They're getting it in this Madrega of Kel Shakai, the Almighty Master of everything, but it's not the same as the being who gives existence to everything at every moment. So these are different realities, different levels of prophecy, and Moshe's is superior. And this distinction between the Madrega of the patriarchs and the Madrega Moshe Rabbeinu is now going to sit nicely on the distinction we've been making all along between the Shem Elokim and the Shem Havaya. Good evening, Steve. Welcome. Congratulations on 8th grade graduation of your granddaughter. Glad you can make it. We're talking about the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, versus Moshe Rabbeinu. And we're going to now assign them different madregas. Moshe's on a higher level. The Torah is pretty explicit about that. He's the highest level prophet that ever was and ever will be. And now the Nefesh HaHaim is aligning that. Moshe is going to be with the Shem Havaya, and the patriarchs are going to be with the Shem Elokim. So let's see how he lays that out. Ki al haroiv, be'inyan hasagas ha'avois. When you go through Bereshis and you see how the Avos were interacting with Hashem, matzinu nemar Hashem Elokim. There's a lot of Shem Elokim there in their personal interaction with God. For example, Ha'elokim asher hitchalchu avotai lefanav. That's Jacob speaking. Ha'elokim haro'eh oti me'odi. That's also Jacob speaking. V'chein anachnu koirim oiso yizbarach Elokei Avraham. The very fact that in the Shmona Esrei and in many places we call Hashem Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. So that is also, it's on the level of Elokim. the master of all forces. As we explained above, the Kedusha of the Avos is that they're living in a natural world and they are totally devoted to doing Hashem's will in that world. And therefore Hashem abrogates the laws of nature when necessary to support them in their activities. Jay?
I was just thinking, what's the other option? You say, okay, Avraham, okay, Yitzchak, Yaakov. What are you? You say the Shem Havaya, Avraham, Shem
You're
Havaya,
right.
Yitzchak,
You're
Yaakov.
right.
You don't see that. I mean, I don't think so. At least
I agree.
you have
I agree.
anything like that.
Elsewhere, actually, the Nefesh HaHaim, I think, actually justifies that. And he says what you're saying is that there's no construct form of the Shem Havaya. And the reason is there can't be, because Hashem's existence is independent of anything else. So he can't be called Havaya Shel anything. Whereas the Shem Elokim, which is the master of all forces, but there are forces. And so Elokei Avraham, Elokei Moshe, Elokei Adoini, etc., etc. So I agree. That's a fundamental distinction between those two shemos. So it's a little bit of a pircha on the point he's making here. But he's really just observing that we find the patriarchs with the Shem Elokim.
I mean, the Shem Havaya, I think, doesn't normally relate to people or anything. It just is. I mean, you say Hashem Elokeinu, but it's Elokeinu. There's no, what's the grammatical term for it?
Decline. You can't decline the noun Hashem and make it into any a construct form into any other way to connect it to an object or something like that. You're right about that. And even Moshe Rabbeinu is really called Ish Elokim. So right now that doesn't fit so well with his shtickle Torah. He doesn't bring in that pasuk. But anyway, he is building a general paradigm that lines up the patriarchs with the Shem Elokim, and he's going to put Moshe Rabbeinu with the Shem Havaya. So he's saying like this: Shelo ishkichu al shum koyach ve'inyan be'olam klal, omnam hasagas nevuasam lo haita bebittel hakoychos mimitziusam legamre. So they see God as the master of everything, lo ishkichu on anything, but their prophecy still does not include a total negation of reality in its entirety, the way that the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu does. V'zeh ma shekasu ba'era el Avraham b'kel shakai, she'inyano gam kein ke'inyan Hashem Elokim. So the Nefesh HaChaim is making a comparison between the Shem Kel Shakai and the Shem Elokim. Ratza loymar, shani balakoichois kulam, ubirtsoisi kol rega, ani mishaded. Again, he uses this word mishaded, which is like to plunder or to steal from. A pirate is a shoded. So whenever I want, God says, I can break the rules. I can snatch away from the rules of nature. Ani mishaded marechet kol hakoichos me'asher kavati. Even though I'm the one that made the rules. I made all the rules bahem ba'es habriya. And yet, when I want to, like I said, Abraham in the fiery furnace, I don't want the fire to burn him right now. So Hashem plucks him out or leaves him in the fiery furnace, but it doesn't burn him. That's an abrogation of the laws of physics, the laws of nature. But God is acting as Kel Shakai, and he's Shoded Marchot Shamayim.
So
Kel Shakai.
I can't really think of outright, statements in the Torah that the Avot, were Zochet Nisim. I mean, yes, we can talk about the Medrash and Kishanet, which is interesting, I think. Why doesn't the Torah, if indeed they were Zochet Nisim, why doesn't the Torah talk about what Nisim are, everything is not. All right, so, Avraham was able to defeat, the kings, but that's more, that could be, ascribed to a natural thing. He had a good army or good soldiers.
Of 318 men, he had a
good strategy. He had a good strategy, whatever it was. But it's not like an outrightness. I mean, it's not like Moshe Rabbeinu is doing the Makot or that's that's an outright
I think
ness.
you're right. I mean, what you're saying is a fact. Okay, the Torah does not tell a lot of nisim about the avos, and I think that really fits with the shtickle Torah here of the Nefesh HaHaim, that the avos are living a natural life, and within nature, like Yaakov Avinu and the sheep, and how he gets so rich from Lavan's sheep and everything. And yes, he was smart and he was playing it and so forth, but he was having siyata dishmaya within the laws of nature and so forth. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu is totally breaking the rules with the Eser Makois and Kriyas Yamsuf, and that's because the Avos are living Bekel Shakai, and Moshe Rabbeinu is leading the Jewish people b'madregas Yud Kei Vav Kei. So I think what you're saying is it fits with this Dvar Torah, that these are two different levels, and the Avos had not yet, or really ever in a sense, risen to this level of hashgacha of the Shem Havaya Baruch Hu.
But there are plenty of midrashim that talk about nisim that occurred to the avot.
There are midrashim like that, but the way we're going to understand them is through Kel Shakai, that Hashem is mishaded marachot shemayim in Baaretz. Okay, so it's like a breaking of the rules. Aval bevchinas inyan shmi havaya k'moshen izboyer inyan la'el lo nodati lahem b'asagat nevuatam. Their prophecy did not come down to them through a pathway of the clarity of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Aval Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom hayta hasagas nevuaso b'chinas Hashem ha'etzem hamayuchad havaya baruch hu. So now this is Moshe Rabbeinu, this is mamish, the real thing. It's the Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. Lachein lo haya shum koyach chotzetz bifnei or hasagas nevu aso. This is really why the Torah, how the Torah can be given through Moshe Rabbeinu. He's mamish bringing down the light, the energy, the intensity of the Torah through which everything was created, and it's totally unfiltered. It's like all the power and clarity of the Torah is coming into this world through Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's no choitzitz, no chatzitza bifnei or hasagas nevuaso. And we're gonna talk more about that now. That Moshe Rabbeinu undergoes an entire self-nullification, where he says, "V'nachnu ma." What are we? We are nothing. Ich bin gornished. Okay, that's Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's gornished. Therefore, the divine light comes through him in a totally unfiltered way. V'chein al yedei kol nisei Hashem shenasu al yado Moshe Rabbeinu ra'u kulam bittul mitzias kol hakoyches legamrei. Everybody sees that there's nothing to nature. There's no other power. Ein od milvado. Ein od milvado yizbarach legamrei kamashmo. The simplest idea that there's nothing else that exists, only God. K'moshe kasav ataharei saladas ki Hashem Elokim ein od milvado. Vehu inyan perush Hashem hamiyuchad havaya baruch hu kanal. And this is what we've been talking about at great length, about the essence of the meaning of the Shem Havaya, that it is existence itself, and God is the only true existence, and nothing else really exists. V'zeh ma shekasuv, this is the beginning of Parshas Va'era, vayidaber Elokim el Moshe, vayomer elav ani Hashem. And that pasuk is really sort of wow. He starts by speaking b'shem Elokim, vayidaber Elokim, and he continues and concludes the statement by saying ani Hashem. So Elokim Kaviyachol says ani Hashem. And this is what we say in Kriyat Shema every day. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem is all one, ze echad. So here, vayidaber Elokim ani Hashem. Hodio etzem bechinas hasagas nevuaso. Shegam Hashem Elokim. Even if God is appearing to Moses in prophecy through the Shem Elokim, etzlo hakol bechinas havaya. They're interrelated, and even the Shem Elokim, I told you recently, there was a gematria. The gematria course of Elokim is 86, and I'm trying to think what it was, if it was for kisui or levush or something. There was a idea that Elokim is really a covering of the Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. So they're very, very closely related, and ultimately it's all one. Ki inyan akasu ki Hashem hu Elokim me'az ve'elech lo nizkar etzlo vayidbar Hashem vayomer Hashem. The rest of the Torah is God speaking to Moses on this madrega of his prophecy b'shem Hashem, b'shem Havaya Baruch Hu. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lo emor, vayomer Hashem al Moshe. V'zeu, and that level of clarity, that spaklaria ha'meira, was never reached by anybody again. And that's the pshat, v'zeu lo kam navi k'Moshe, asher yida'o havaya panim el panim. V'zeh ma shekoseh b'tikin chavav legabi avan lo ischazya ele b'menalayim, aval legabi Moshe b'lo kisuya klal. So he quotes from the Zohar. What does he say there? Okay, they were wearing shoes, and Moshe had to take off his shoes. Okay, again, the difference in the madregas between that was. It even says by Avraham when he, let's say, had the Bris Ben Absarim, he fell and he was betar dema, and the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is not betar dema. He's not in a trance. He does not lose control of his body. He is like awakened, astute, and aware during his prophetic experience. So this chapter, it's about different pathways of God revealing himself to mankind, but it's also, and in a sense, primarily about a delineation between the prophecy of Moses versus the prophecy of the patriarchs.
So if Moshe was that nullified, would we say that God was talking to himself?
I'm going to say yes, and we have a pasuk that says that there's a pasuk in the end of one of the parshos, Asher Hashem midaber elav, and Rashi points out that the chirik under the mem, it's as if Hashem, it's saying that Hashem mitdaber, the hitpael, which is a reflexive verb. So it's as if God is speaking to himself and Moshe merely overhears. So look, Moshe exists. He's a real person. He was born. He had a mother. He had brothers and he had a brother and a sister. He had a wife. He had 2 kids. He's a man. He's not an angel, but he succeeded through his life's work and his intensity and he was the un of Mikol Adam. He was the most humble person in the world. So he's totally nullified his sense of self. He sees himself as an expression of the divine will, and that's a really big deal. So I'm going on. Gadol shenemar b'Moshe v'Aaron yoiser mimashe nemar be'Avraham. So this is a Mefurish Gemara in Chulin, and it's fascinating. The ilu be'Avraham ksiv ve'anoichi afar ve'efer. Right, Abraham, when he was arguing with God about saving stone, and he says, who am I to talk to you? And I'm just dust and ashes. So Abraham sees himself, he calls himself dust and ashes, Afar ve'efer, klape HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Moshe and Aaron, they use a different expression. The ilu Moshe ve'Aaron ksiv ve'nachnu ma. What are we? Meaning we are nothing. Okay, so although dirt and ash is not a groise kavod, but it's still something. Whereas Moshe and Aaron, their attitude towards themselves, and the Nefesh HaHaim says particularly this is Moshe speaking on behalf of Aaron, so it's really Moshe's madrega particularly, is that it's not that we're dust and ashes, we are nothing. Okay, so here the Nefesh HaHaim explains it at length. Ki afar ve'efer al kol panim misroya adayin limitziut afar. It's dirt, but it exists. Aval Moshe Rabbeinu ala shalom amar v'nachnu ma ki ilu ein shum metzias be'olam klal legamrei. We are nothing, nada, zero. Okay, garnished from garnished. Ve'im ki gamet Aaron kalalito bezot habechina k'mamaram gadol shenemar b'Moshe ve'Aaron. So the Nefesh HaHaim is saying, is Aaron also on that level? So he's answering, Lefishet Lunat Yisrael. This is when the Jews were complaining about the man and everything. And Moshe and Aaron say, are you complaining against us? What are we? לפי שתלונת ישראל הייתה על שניהם, השיבן בלושן רבים. אבל עיקר בזאת המדרגה, הנוראה, היה הוא לבד. But the Nefesh HaHaim says that really this madrega of nachnuma, of absolute nullification of the self to the will of God, which even the Avos had a sense of self, very humble, afer ve'efer, but it's not nothing. But by Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron in his shadow, it's a madrega of nachnuma, which is like absolute nothingness. Jay?
Yeah, so if that's true, then Moshe Rabbeinu had no bechira.
I'm glad you brought that up. The Meshech Chochma, Somer Midvinsk says exactly that. He claims that it's important that Moshe Rabbeinu lost his bechira in order to give us the Torah, so that we know he couldn't change anything in the Torah, that it's only what God told him. So it has to be that Moshe didn't have bechira. I don't think that's true, really. I think, it's a chiddush of Rameir Simcha, but the Rishonim don't say that. So I think that, you're not going to catch Moshe Rabbeinu on doing Averas.
Except when he hit the rock, whatever Avera that was.
Hu ka'as, he lost his temper. So whatever we're going to say about it, Chazal used that lashon, that hu ba bichlal ka'as, vu ba bichlal taos. His anger led him to err. So that's Chazal that say that about Moshe. So he's not an angel, and he's not absolutely infallible because he faltered to a certain degree. So we're talking therefore not that he's an angel or he's infallible, but we're talking, I would say, about his, I'm going to use the term attitude towards himself, his sense of nothingness, his sense of bittul, nullification towards the unique will of God, which is everything. And I'm nothing vis-a-vis that. But again, he's a human being. So he could lose that madrega for a moment or something if he gets angry.
Maybe, it's just vis-a-vis Hashem, vis-a-vis, Bnei Yisrael.
That's another point, is, all this is, between you and God, but how do you behave to your neighbors and your wife and everything like that? I think by these great men, the patriarchs and Moshe Rabbeinu, I do think they lived this madrega. But you're right. That's who keeps annoying Moshe throughout Parshas, Chumash Bamidbar. The people keep bringing him down. They're complaining and they're groaning and they want meat and they hate the man, and you could see Moshe's so tired of them, and he's asking give me some support here. I'm just so different than the people. What they want and what I want are so different. I need some middle management to deal with all their stuff. I can't deal with them. That's how I read the Parshas. Okay, so we have a little Haggah here. I'm going to take it on. The inyan afer ve'efer. Okay, what's the difference between afer ve'efer? Hu ke'inyan kavanas para aduma. Okay, the para aduma, the red heifer, which we know is a chok and we don't understand it. Sheyichlalalu ha'pei reish dinim b'mekor shirasham be'alef shu koyach ha'pashut shel kol ha'oisiois ve'inyan achiluk ben afar le'efer ke'inyan achiluk ben kasnos or le'or. These three lines of text are unbelievably packed with depth. And he starts by talking about the number 280, which is Gematria Pei Reish. And there's something known about these 280 dinim. And so the word afar and the word afer both have Pei Reish in it. The one has an aleph and the one has an ayin. So it's aleph Pei Reish and ayin Pei Reish. Now aleph Pei Reish is the aleph, which is the first of all the letters. It's like the father of all the letters. It's the koyach hapashut of all the oisiois. And what's the difference between aleph and ayin? I mean, the aleph, just to say the aleph, it doesn't say anything. It has no sound. Now the ayin, although it doesn't also really say much, but it is a guttural stop. Ah. So the aleph and the ayin are really closely related, but they're different. And one of the places that this is so beautiful, this is such a beautiful Dvar Torah, is in the cloaks, the begadim, the levush that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He made for them kasnos or, okay? He made for them gowns of leather, like he gave them, whether he gave them human skin or he gave them, some sort of loincloth or some sort of jacket, whatever. But there's a beautiful Gemara that says Rebbe Meir in his Chumash, in learning the Parsha, he wouldn't read kasnos or with an ayin, he would read kasnos or with an aleph. In other words, they were enrobed in light. They were like a hologram. They weren't physical at all. They didn't have any skin. They're not wearing anything because they're like a being of light. And I remind you, when the angels saw Adam, Bikshu Loimer Lefanev Kadosh, they thought he was God. So look how holy Adam and Chava were at the very beginning. They had kasnos or with an aleph. And it's only after the chait where they separate themselves from God and they lower their madrega so drastically, then now God gives them kasnos or with an ayin. Now they're opaque and they need to be clothed with leather in order to be protected from the dirt and all the zuama of this world. So a really beautiful thing about the Afer and Afer here. There's more to it. He brings from Rabbi Frankel here. Brings from. I'm going to say a little more. I'm going to go further with it. He talks. There's a Malbim that talks about it. The 280 cubits of the Mishkan and the source of the Aleph. Now, what is this 280 dinim? What is that about? So he says it corresponds to Mansepach. Mansepach are the 5 Hebrew letters that have oisiois asophios. So right, although it starts with Chaf, we say Mem, Nun, Sadi, Pei, and Chaf. You have Mem Sofit, Nun Sofit, Pei Sofit, Sadi Sofit, and Chaf Sofit, Mansepach. And those have a lot of symbolic importance. And if we add them all up, they equal 280. So Mansepach is an expression of judgment, which control the world of action. Some light may be shed on these comments of the Malbim. The Hey, okay? The second Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei corresponds to Malchus. And that Hey, the numerical value of 5, relates to these 5 letters, Mansepach, okay? Splits into an ultimate expression of God's kingship, which spans all of time with Mem Nun. Listen to this. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloich. So Melech, Mem Lamed Chaf, is 90, right? So Mem Nun equal 90, Malach. And Sadik is also 90, that's Melech. And Pei Chaf are 100, that's Yimloch. So the second Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei also relates to this world of action, where we see God as a separate entity to ourselves, as a king who is separate from his people. So the number 280 is a numerical allegory to the ultimate expression of God's kingship over this world, where as a result of God's gevura, his self-restraint and strict judgments, this world appears to be an entity in its own right. The letters Pei Reish, we know Pei Reish. Pei Reish are like lifrosh and lahafrid. They separate things. They can also denote separation, like Afer, ashes are what is left after the other 3 primary elements of fire, wind, and water have been separated from it. And the para incorporates the 280 plus the Hey, the second Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and is used as a tool to return things to their source, to change impurity into purity, to connect the separate divisions of this world, the Pei Reish with their unified source, the Afer, the Aleph, the unity of Hashem, by using the Afer, the ashes of the Paraduma. I think it's a really, really deep and beautiful Dvar Torah about Afar and Afer and the Pei Reish Dinim, and the word Afer, and all that depth of the Mansepach. So I'm now going to try to finish the chapter. He has more wonderful things to tell us. Yitzchak amar leMoshe. This is like a funny, this is a midrashic dialogue between two great men. Who's greater, right? Like sort of an arm wrestling match between, Moshe and Yitzchak. And so Yitzchak says, Moshe, ani gadol mimcha, I'm greater than you. Shepashatati tzavari, I put my neck out there and let my father shecht me on the mizbeach. V'ra'iti et pnei hashchina, and look, when I put myself on the mizbeach, I was able to look up into the heavens and see pnei shchina. How does Moshe answer that? Amar le Moshe, ani nit'aleti yoter mimcha. I got to a higher place than you. Ata ra'ita pnei shchina v'kahu einecha. You saw pnei shchina, Yitzchak, true, but it caused you blindness. The Torah says you became blind. And Moshe, it says, lo nas lecho lo ka'eno. His eyes did not get dimmed or blinded. Aval ani haiti medaber im hashchina panim befanim v'lo kahu einai. Okay, it's a beautiful, sort of dramatic midrash of an arm wrestling match between Yitzchak and Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Nefesh HaHaim takes it very seriously and says it's not just, my dad's stronger than your dad. It's Muvuar Lemevin. This is on a high level. Look at Rabbeinu Chaim Vital in Sefer Gilgulem. And he says now a really strong thing that it says in the Torah, Avraham, Avraham. And it says Yaakov, Yaakov. But when it says those two names, there's a psik, Beineim, which is like a line in the trop, separating Avraham from Avraham. We'd say it, the Avraham milabala, like his ruchnius, from the Avraham milamata, his gashmius. And there's some sort of dividing line between them. Yaakov, the same thing. He's a great man, and he nullifies his will to the will of God. But between Yaakov Elyon and Yaakov Tachton, there's a psik, there's a hefsek. Mashe ein kain, Moshe, lo psik taima. Shehu al inyan hefsek v'chatzitza mu'etet mi'inyan haguf. Okay, so he's quoting from Reb Chaim Vital that there's a remez to this between the Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu versus the Madrega of the Avos HaKadoshim.
Moshe was at the snap?
Yes, that's where it says Moshe. You're right about that.
So what
Yes.
do we get out of this? The dialogue here. It's like the opposite of the World Wrestling Federation, apparently.
So what did he say that it's Mevu'ar Lemevin? We're comparing these two dargas of Avodas Hashem, and they're actually both very necessary. Because remember how much the Nefesh HaHaim has belabored the point that we're not allowed to do Torah and mitzvahs in the frame of mind that, look, it's all God anyway, what's it really matter? Which is a natural outcome of entertaining this thought. I want to say another sentence I read this week in the Ramchal. He said, Hashem v'hipucho eino zulato. Okay? That's a very powerful idea. God and his opposite is still God. Like there is no opposite of God. Okay? Like the opposite of good is evil. The opposite of tall is short. But there's no opposite of God. And so even like God's absence is still his presence because there's nothing but God. That's a very, very powerful idea. But that idea is also a dangerous idea because, and we saw this in the Midrashim, does God really care how you shecht animals? Does he really care if you do the mitzvahs? On a certain madrega, it shouldn't matter, it doesn't matter. And yet, it matters. We have to do Torah mitzvahs. The Torah is full of telling us, Ubacharta b'chayim, choose good, choose life. So we gotta hold these two thoughts in our head at once. On the one hand, ein od milvado kipshuto mamish, and that's the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's how we got the Torah. We needed somebody on that level. The nachnu ma, I'm totally nothing, because there's only God. On the other hand, we need people here with us in this world who are overcoming their yetzer, their sense of self, their pride, in order to be mevatel their ratzon, the ritzoino. Like, I'm here, I'm important, but God is more important. And that's sort of the avos here, that even Abraham says, Vanoichi afer ve'efer, I'm dust and ashes. But dust and ashes also exist. So I exist, I'm here, and I'm ready to do your will, bezrizus. But that's not ein od milvado. That's Bereshis bara Elokim. So we have these two parallel tracks of Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, that he's the only being. And we have the other track of Bereshis bara Elokim, that he's the master of all forces. And ultimately they're one thing, Hashem hu Elokim, it's all God. But we need Moses' approach and we need the Avos approach. So this Midrash, which is a confrontation, a debate between Moshe and Yitzchak, is talking about these two mahalchim, these two ways of serving God, from the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu versus the perspective of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is here, so when he looks up at the Shekhinah, he cries, he goes blind. Moshe is so null and void that he's able, panim befanim, to speak to God, panim befanim v'lo kahu einav. It doesn't even affect him, his body. He's strong in the last day of his life. He's 120 years old, and he's as good as new. He hasn't worn out at all. That is, there's nobody else like that. Everybody else wears out over time.
He did look away from the snap.
Yitzhak was overconfident in his midos or something?
I don't think that. I think Yitzchak is presenting the chashivus of his avoida. Ani pashatati tzavari v'ra'iti pnei hashchina. Because I'm here and I take my existence seriously, and still I stuck out my neck to be a korban Lashem, I was zoicha to see the angels, to see the Shechina. So there's a lot to be said for that. And that's the much more mainstream approach. Because I'm not Moshe Rabbeinu and you're not Moshe Rabbeinu, but we could be like Yitzchak Avinu, that even though I recognize my own importance and my role in the world, I'm going to nullify my will to do the will of God. So I think Yitzchak is speaking on behalf of Klal Yisrael and everybody, every man, and Moshe is speaking on the unique madrega of the only person to ever live on that level that he lived. So that's what I think their arm wrestling match is.
It's just funny that they're. It sounds like they're tooting their own horn.
It does sound like that, and like comparing it to big league wrestling and everything. But Midrash is like that. Midrash likes to tell provocative stories that people can relate to and think of wrestling matches, because Midrash is it's not only for scholars, but it's for the Amei Haaretz. It's to have something fun to tell people, and they go like, ooh, ah. So I think that's like, you have to give a little slack to the language of the Midrash, and it sounds like they're two guys, in a wrestling match, because it's trying to attract the attention of all levels of people. Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. A great chapter of the Nefesh. Next week we're off. I'm traveling, so I'll see you in 2 weeks, Bez Shem.
Very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.